Okay, wanted to introduce Angela Decker, who's the horticulturalist from Red Butte Gardens and Medicinal Gardens, and I think she was out sampling the plants out there with that. Actually, we put her in the wrong salon, so we're welcome to have her here, and we're grabbing her slide deck right now to put up on the PowerPoint.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for the mix-up. You can totally blame it on me. I was just sitting in the room next door listening to lectures on kidney injury, and those were about the only words out of the whole lecture that I understood was kidney injury. Never claimed to be a genius, but I don't know that I've ever been in a room where I felt like the least intelligent person, but now I do know what that feels like. So please be kind, because I'm pretty sure the same is true of this room. So today I'm here to talk to you about medicinal gardening. It's a very broad topic. There's a lot of plants that are involved in creating medicines and also just benefiting personal health in a variety of different ways. I am not a doctor, so I don't really know that side of it. I know the plant side of it. So we'll talk a little bit today about plants that you can grow here in Utah in our climate, things that you can use as a gardener, as a homeowner, or that you can have your patients maybe grow in their garden. There are a lot of plants out there that we can use and synthesize into drugs, and obviously you don't have the equipment or the time or maybe the know-how to do that at your own house. So there are some ways you can use plants that are a little more simple, easy to do for the average everyday person like me. So once we get the slides going, I'll talk a little bit about those. I've got lots of pretty pictures. I feel like this talk is a little bit more of the light side of things for your day, I'm guessing. I promise I do not have any spreadsheets, no bar charts. There aren't even any percentages, and I'm not sure I even have any numbers in there. So it'll give you a chance to turn your brain off for a minute and just look at some pretty pictures. So yeah, once we get those slides on, we'll be able to look at those. But at the University of Utah, which is where Red Butte Garden is, we have a variety of gardens in there. We have 23 cultivated acres of gardens, so a variety of different plants. And one of our gardens is themed as a medicinal garden. It's one that we've renovated over the last 2 years since I got there to provide a better story of a variety of different things that medicinal plants can do. So we redesigned it with the thought that every year we would change the theme and talk about different ways that plants are involved in medicine. So this past year, we have had the theme be forest medicine. So we talked about how being just in the presence of trees and being in the forest is helpful to reduce your blood pressure. It relieves stress. There's actually chemicals that trees and other plants let off, in addition to oxygen, that are beneficial for our bodies and that can help us reduce our stress and even fight things like cancer. And then we also talk about some of the forest species of plants that provide us with actual materials that are synthesized into making medicines. And we also talk about some of the countries and regions around the world that are instituting policy around different topics like forest bathing in Japan, a topic called Shinrin-yoku in Japanese, that actually they have governmental philosophies, I guess, and even policies that encourage people to go out into the forest in order to have better health. South Korea actually has something that they call, loosely translated as happy trains, that take school bullies out to the woods to try to teach them to be nicer by being out in nature. So let's see, Scandinavian countries, Finland in particular, they actually recommend 5 hours a month, I think, of nature time to their citizens for better health. So it's something that's really gaining traction, I assume, in the medical field, is also in the policy governmental field as well. I guess while we're waiting for that, how many of you out there are gardeners? We got some gardeners out in the group. Okay, so hopefully some of these pictures you recognize. How many of you, either yourselves or maybe with your patients, talk about using plants in any sort of medicinal way outside of, capsule form and stuff, actually using the plants? We got a few in the room. Okay, so maybe we'll talk about some of the things that you've done with your patients or yourself. Well, the way that plants can help us, there's a variety of ways. So obviously there's dietary We ingest them by eating them. That's my favorite way to get the health benefits out of a plant, is through eating them. We also have topical applications, bath and body products, skincare, toothpaste, things like that, where we can absorb the benefits from plants and the compounds found within them. We have some that are used in wound care, either topically or in pain management functions, usually taken probably as some sort of medication. An example of that would be aspirin, which comes from the bark or the leaves of the willow species, or salix, which is where you get salicylic acid. Those names are all kind of related. And then some of the medications and treatments that we have out there, again, not a doctor, just pulling from some information that I found through some research. Digitalis, there's actually a plant called Digitalis. It's where the medicine Digitalis originated. You might know it as foxglove. It's a very beautiful garden plant, often found in country gardens or cottage gardens. And then we also have the medication for cancer called Taxol. I don't know if you all are familiar with that one. That one originated from the Taxus brevifolia, which is the Pacific yew tree found in the northwestern United States. That was discovered back in the, I believe, 50s, and eventually became known as a very promising cancer medication or therapy. And that leads me into our next theme for the Red Butte Garden Medicinal Garden this year, starting Memorial Day weekend. Our signage in our garden is going to talk about cancer-fighting flora, and we're highlighting all of the plants in our garden that have some sort of role in helping us to fight or prevent cancer. And then also something that plants can provide for us is help on a mental health level. Reduction of stress, even just walking through the garden, help us to prevent or curb illnesses. And then the act of gardening can be very helpful in reducing stress. For some, other people might find gardening to be extremely stressful, so I suppose it depends on the person. Or it depends on your garden. If it's full of weeds, it might be stress-inducing rather than stress-relieving. Are we hopefully ready? Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I will just go through the plants then that I have on my list. I apologize, you can't see the pretty pictures. So yeah, and talking about stress, so you want to relieve stress when you're doing your gardening. Some things that you can have in your medicinal garden might be really convoluted in how they're used in medicine. So if you can think of Taxol, again, that's something that's extracted from the bark of a tree. Nobody's going to be stripping the bark off of all their trees in order to create some sort of capsule. So you want to plant things that are easy to grow, that will do well here, that you can actually utilize. And so the example that I had on that slide is the Crocus sativus, which is the crocus, the little purple flower. You've probably seen similar ones before. Has 3 little strands, stigmas on it, which is where we get saffron. Saffron is one of those herbs or items that do have positive health benefits through ingestion. I believe it can also be used to make a variety of other medicines through synthesis in laboratories. That is well over my head to explain. But for each of those little tiny flowers, there's 3 little tiny filaments, and you have to harvest them with your hands. You can't harvest them mechanically, which is why it's such an expensive herb. It's one of the most expensive herbs you can buy. I think it is 1 acre creates hundreds of thousands of flowers, which ultimately produces 1 pound of saffron. A whole acre of flowers produces 1 pound of saffron, which is about $1,500 worth of saffron. So probably not the type of thing that you're going to want to have in your home herb garden. So selecting your plants is important if you're going to actually use them for something purposeful. The first example that I had were roses. Roses have fruit, if you're not aware. Most of us are familiar with the flower itself, the fragrance it gives off. They're very peaceful. It's very meditative to prune roses, so in that way you get some stress reduction. I find them stressful in the fact that they have thorns. I don't like to work with them. But they do have what are called hips. When the flower goes away, the fruit is produced, and we have hips on the roses. You see them, they're usually about quarter size. Some roses have larger hips than others. They're chock full of vitamin C, and they're great for teas and also skin products because of the vitamins and minerals that they have in them. Rosa rugosa is a particular species that's recommended if you're going to be growing roses for medicinal purposes and for the hips. They have very, very large hips that are flavorful. The next example that I have is echinacea. So most of you are probably familiar with purple coneflower, echinacea. It also comes in a variety of different colors. There she is. All right, so you guys have probably all seen this out in your gardens or even out in nature somewhere. It comes in a variety of different colors. It's another great tea ingredient packed full of vitamin C. You use the flower parts, or even the roots can be used. It's also a great pollinator plant that encourages bees and other wildlife to visit your garden. The next example that I have is another one that's probably very familiar to you, is chamomile. And do I have to push this little button here in order to make it advance? This guy? Oh, which one? Okay. So there's a variety of different chamomiles out there, so you might want to read up on which one you prefer to have if you're going to have it in your medicinal garden. The first one I have up there is Roman chamomile. This one is a perennial. It's more of a low-growing ground cover. It has the characteristic white flowers that you probably remember from chamomile, the same great flavor and probably sedative effect for a chamomile. Different from the German chamomile, which is, you see there, the botanical names. It's a completely different genus of plant. In the italicized words, there's genus, species. They are actually very different plants, just very similar in the way they look and the properties that they have in them. That one is actually an annual, but it does self-seed, so if you want that in your garden, you don't necessarily have to plant it or seed it every year. It will do it for itself, but you will also have to weed it out as it will wander around and find its way where it wants to be, which might not be where you want it to be. Another example of chamomile that you might be familiar with, or maybe not, is pineapple weed. It's in the same genus as the German chamomile. It's a shorter growing, wild growing chamomile that smells more of pineapple. You've probably seen this if you've gone out and walked through a farmscape or out in the wild somewhere. This is one of those highly touted wild foraged chamomiles that people like. I don't know if we have any wild foragers in here or if you have any patients that are. There are some cautions to wild foraging. There's responsible practices for collecting in the wild so as not to decimate the population that exists there, but also if you don't know the landowner, if you don't know what's been going on with the land, it could be sprayed with pesticides, herbicides, it could be alongside the highway, and there could be any number of things spilled off the side of the highway. So if you have anybody that's interested in doing that, please caution them to know where they're foraging. Sedative, anti-inflammatory, great in tea, very easy to harvest, and also dries very well and stores for quite a while. So this is one that you can harvest yourself, have in your kitchen, let it dry completely, and then put it in a nice sterile jar. It's really pretty in the jar if it's a clear jar, and also it will keep, and then you can have tea through the winter, which is really when I like to drink my tea anyway. Hot beverages aren't my favorite summer drink. Smells like bubble gum, or in some cases pineapple, so that's kind of fun. And if you have kids, it's a really fun plant for children. Also, the Queen of England has it interplanted with her lawn, and she's very fancy. So if you want to be fancy, you can have that interplanted in your lawn as well. Let's see if I can make this work. Oh, I don't know if that was me or you. The next example is calendula. This is an annual flower. Comes in a variety of colors, typically white, yellow, or orange. You can easily find seed for these in just about any seed catalog or at any store or nursery around town that sells seeds. The petals are used in teas and salads. You can have very fancy salads with some of these edible flowers. The oils are used in bath and body products and also oral hygiene products due to their antifungal properties and anti-inflammatory properties. Can be used as a natural dye for fabric, so multi-purpose plant. And the seed heads look like creepy little claws, so if you, again, have kiddos, it's another fun one for them. It's a little unfortunate. The best time to use this plant is right after the flower opens, is when the petals have the most resin content, so you're actually destroying the beauty of them. So I suggest planting a lot of them. That way you can harvest some and leave the others so you can still enjoy the beauty of the flowers that you don't harvest. The next example of a medicinal plant is catnip. You guys probably all have seen this around town somewhere. It's a prolific bloomer, multi-season bloom, can be harvested multiple times and it will come back. You can just cut the plant all the way to the ground a few times a year and it will just grow back and have more flowers. Bees love it. Cats also love it. They react differently though. Not all cats go crazy. Sometimes they just get really sleepy. And that's kind of the properties that it has for people as well, sedative properties. Again, great for teas. Has a variety of different vitamins. The next one is flax. I've actually seen this the last couple of days growing along I-15. So this is a wild growing native plant here in Utah. There's a variety of different species and also cultivars that you can find out there. This is one that we have in our medicinal garden. The seeds are a source of omega-3 fatty acids and lignans and dietary fiber and protein. So this kind of deviates away from those edible flowers that we've been talking about and gets more into some other types of health benefits that those don't have. You can find flaxseed at most grocery stores and health stores. You have to plant quite a bit of it in your garden in order to get a usable amount, but it is a very small plant that will self-seed and just fill in. It's very dainty and it looks very good interspersed with other things and doesn't tend to take over, but can be pretty prolific even without being thuggish in the garden. Often used in smoothies or as substitutes for other substances in foods like flour, even eggs. If you grind it up into a paste, it has a similar consistency to eggs, so you can use it as a substitute there. Most recipes I've seen, you don't use it as a full substitute. You take part of the flour out and replace it with flax instead of taking all the flour out of a baked dish and replacing it with flax. It's just a partial sub. This one you might not have seen in your home garden or your home nursery. This one is the common name canna, if you're familiar with that. It's often an ingredient in tea. It's a native of South Africa, the plant. Its botanical name is Scaledium tortuosum, which I think sounds like a Harry Potter spell. If you dry the plant, it's more like a succulent. It's very similar to ice plant. If you guys are familiar with ice plant, that's a common one around here. If you dry up the leaves and the stems, in Africa it was chewed before they would go hunting or before they would have a high-stress event to reduce stress in preparation for a high-stress event. Depending on the selection of plant, there are some that are touted to have high concentrations of whatever the compound is. That is a mood booster. It can even be at the level of euphoric. Most of the time when it's marketed for personal use, it's a milder version of that, and it's meant to be just a mood booster. As you can see there is an actual trade name, Zembrin, that is Scaledium tortuosum, dried, whole plant, just dried and put in capsule form. This is another one that might not be as familiar to you, but we have it in the medicinal garden and the herb garden at Red Butte. It's Gotu Cola. Centella asiatica. It's a low-growing ground cover. It's an annual, but it's very fast-growing, so it will fill in very quickly throughout the season, but it is not frost-hardy, so you'll need to plant it after the fear of frost and either remove it from the garden before frost or just know that it's going to die over winter. It's just a leafy green. There's no really showy flower or anything like that, but it's a good base in the garden. It's a nice, solid, just green color with a cute little leaf. I grow this at home in containers and I put it in my smoothies. It's supposed to be good for memory and cognitive function. I do have a history of Alzheimer's in my family, so anytime I have the opportunity to boost memory, I try to do that. Lemon balm is another one that's pretty common. You can get it in a variety of different colors. Usually it's just a solid green color. This is one that's more of a golden lemon balm, which I think is really attractive in the garden to offset some of the other green on green on green that you might see of other leaves. Antioxidant, antiviral, anti a lot of things. It's in the mint family, so it's quite a spreader. So if any of you have ever tackled mint in your yard and know how aggressive it can be, this one isn't typically as aggressive as some other mints like spearmint or peppermint, but it is still pretty thuggish. So my recommendation is to always plant things in the mint family in containers, unless you know for sure that they're not a heavy spreader or cedar. The dried leaves keep their flavor pretty long, so you can harvest large amounts. Since it is so aggressive, you can harvest large amounts, hang them or lay them flat to dry, and then put them in little jars, dry, sterile jars, to store for later use. Again, just making sure that they are completely dry before you store them, so there's no chance of molding or any other issues with that. It is recommended for this and any other seasoning, really, if you're going to store it dry, don't grind it up before you store it. Just store it in as whole a portion as possible, and then as you need to use it, you can grind it up if you need to. It's said that it holds its flavor and it doesn't release all of the oils, which are actually what are providing the flavor. If you grind them up first, then you have a lot more surface area, and it is releasing the useful properties and the flavors more readily. Plantain is another one that you might be familiar with. You've probably considered this a weed. We actually allow this red leaf plantain to grow in the medicinal garden, and I try to chase the seed heads as quickly as I possibly can before it spreads. But the reason why we allow it to stay is, first of all, this red leaf version is a little more rare. The ones we see around here are just a green leaf version. But it's also good for bee stings and burns and other just minor skin injuries. Other gardeners in Red Butte will come to my medicinal garden to find this plant if they get stung by a hornet or a wasp, and say that they just rub the leaf right on there and it alleviates some of the pain from that. Again, this is more of a weed than something you're going to plant in your yard, so if you are interested in using it, please forage responsibly and know your source and what's been used there. The next one you're probably familiar with, violets. These are some Johnny jump ups. There's a variety of different colors out there. There's about 500 different species, actually more like 550 plus species of viola out there. So they all have different qualities to them. So if you're going to use one, I do suggest researching it to know what its particular qualities are. But generally speaking, they are high in vitamin A, vitamin C, and dietary fiber. It's the flower and the leaves that you can use. This is more of an edible flower, but it's also used in lotions and soaps and things like that. It's really great. You can actually freeze these in ice cubes and use them in lemonade and cocktails. It's kind of a fun edible flower to use in the garden and very easy to get a hold of. The next one is a tree. You all have probably seen this before. This is a Rocky Mountain juniper. The juniper berries are really what's used, but also sometimes the limbs and the boughs can be used as steam or over coals to breathe in. But usually it's the berries that are used in some sort of culinary application. The most commonly known is the flavoring of gin. Also told to keep witches away, which, again, I'm not a doctor, but I suppose that's probably good for your health. This next one is another tree. Lots of different pine trees out there, so just the Pinus species in general, or genus. The young needles are used in tea. It's high in vitamin C. This genus was used heavily by the Native Americans all over the country, wherever pine trees grew. For a variety of different reasons. Also, the tree has a natural bandage function whenever it has a physical injury, either a pruning wound or an insect damage or even storm damage. It will secrete pitch or sap. You've probably seen that before if you've ever worked around pine trees. That's a tree's natural defense against injury. And that pine sap or pitch can actually be used as a salve or as a carrier for other things for topical application. It has a really lovely smell. If you like the camphor-y pine scent, people are really drawn to that. Ephedra is one that you've probably heard of if you have heard of like the dietary supplements. Not many of those out there anymore. It was banned, I think, in 2004, ephedra, for weight loss. At least that's what I've read. But the dried stems back in the 40s and 50s initially were used to treat asthma. And this is another one of those cautionary tales, not necessarily for foraging, but for if you have something that's natural. Just because it's natural doesn't mean that it's good for you, and also too much of a good thing can be very damaging. So just encouraging people to use things wisely. Moderation is the key. Where's the button? There we go. Here's another one that you may or may not have seen. This is more of an ornamental variety of kale, it's called. It's not actually the same plant as the kale that you're used to buying in the store, but it looks very similar to that. It's high in vitamin C, and it's said to have been used by sailors back in the day to curb scurvy because it is found along sea shores, hence the name sea kale. It has lots of really great fragrant flowers on it. It's very showy. It's actually in full bloom at this time of year right now. Very, very large plant. I don't know if you can tell from that, but it's a lot larger than a standard kale you might be thinking of. Great ornamental in the garden, great fragrance, but also edible. You can cook it just like you would other kales. It's a little fleshier, but still supposedly tasty. And supposedly you can eat the root too. That I have not tried, but it has a very tuberous root that's starchy, kind of like a potato, that's supposed to be edible, both raw and cooked. Yarrow is another one that you all have probably seen before. This one is growing wild in Utah as well as in many yards. Low water requiring. We're all into the water-wise plants these days. Used in ointments for wound recovery, historically or mythologically said to be used by the Trojans during the Trojan War. And also the scientific name for it, you can see there, is Achillea millefolium. It's actually named for Achilles, and supposedly he covered his whole body, he painted his whole body in yarrow leaves, and except for his heel, and that's why they got him. His Achilles heel wasn't protected. And the last one I'll cover is my favorite one. This is the plant that I've done the most study on, lavender, one I'm sure all of you are familiar with. Grows extremely well here in our Mediterranean-like region climate. Depending on the species, the chemical composition can either be relaxing, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, but also there are some that have more abundance of chemical compounds that are, stimulating. Not all lavenders are created equal. There's over 300 species, and I've talked to some aromatherapists that are very specific about the varieties that they want to use because they do extract the oils and send them through a GCMS and find out exactly where those peaks are and what the composition is. There's one in particular that they did a study on in western Colorado. It's a Lavandula angustifolia twickle purple is her name. And she was found to be the highest in linalool and linalool acetate, which are the two major compounds that are relaxants. So if you are into aromatherapy to that degree, there are certain species and varieties that you'll want to seek out over others to get the desired effect. It's a long-lived perennial. It's a great pollinator plant. It's very low maintenance. You just shear it twice a year and harvest, usually when it's in the bud form. If you're going to eat it, or if you're going to use it for essential oil production, you wait till about half the flowers have opened. And then obviously you have to have a still in order to do that, which is a whole other topic. Like I said, our new exhibit coming up in a couple of weeks, we have a whole bunch of signage talking about cancer-fighting flora. So if you're ever down in the University of Utah, Salt Lake area, please come by and pay us a visit and check that out. We have a lot of other great gardens and exhibits as well. And I'll open it up for any questions. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Angie. Thank you very much. So, wonderful, refreshing presentation. So, okay, our last presentation is James Dolly, MD and fellow emergency physicians. James Dolly is an emergency physician in Salt Lake City with Jordan Valley Medical Center, graduated the BS in molecular biology. Digby, practicing medicine in an academic institution, a small community hospital, a trauma center, and in military facilities on 4 different continents. He is now a partner and department chair with Utah Emergency Specialists. Dr. Daly's financial articles have appeared in numerous online and printed publications. He writes regular columns for Physicians, Money Digest, and ACEP Now. He started the White Coat Investor in 2011, now the most widely read physician-specific personal finance and investing website in the world. He published a White Coat Investor, a doctor's guide to personal finance and investing in 2014. Dr. Daly.
How's the sound? Is that okay? You hear me all right in the back? It's good to be here. I have mixed feelings about Weber State. My father went here many moons ago. He was the first person in our family to graduate from college. And so we're very proud of that. And my last time I was on campus was almost exactly 20 years ago. I was playing a hockey game, the last hockey game of my college career, and we lost with about 2 minutes left in the game. So kind of a bittersweet experience for me to come here. But I'm grateful to be here, and I'm excited to share some of this information with you. We're going to be talking about money today, which is usually a topic that gets people a little bit interested. So it's good to have it at the end of the day. Let me see if I got the slides working here. All right, first we ought to make a few disclosures and disclaimers. I have a for-profit business called the White Coat Investor. 95% of what I do is totally free to you, the user. But I do sell your eyeballs. So if you go to my website, you're going to see some ads and stuff. Likewise, I have an online course and a couple of books. If you buy them, I make money. Okay? So that's my disclosure. I'm also a practicing emergency physician. I came directly from the hospital here. I had a shift this morning. And I am not an accountant. I am not a financial advisor. I am not an attorney. I'm licensed to do 2 things in this state, practice medicine and drive, and that's it. So this presentation is for your entertainment and information and doesn't constitute personalized financial advice. A few other caveats we ought to talk about. Anytime we're in a medical setting and talking about money, I need to point out that you and I didn't go into medicine for money. Okay? Now, we probably thought that a reasonable side effect of this choice of career would probably be a little bit of financial comfort, but that wasn't the main reason we chose it. And the truth is that money doesn't make you happy. That's not entirely true. Up to about $75,000 a year of income, the studies show more money actually does make you happier. That might be $110,000 a year in the Bay Area, but beyond that point, it flattens out pretty quickly. However, bad financial decisions are making a lot of physician families very miserable and bringing a lot of stress that doesn't need to be there in their lives. And so mostly what I want to do tonight is kind of take away the taboo we were given in medical school and in residency and in our medical hospitals, whether they're academic hospitals or whether they're community hospitals, and just take that away and take that taboo away and let you talk to each other about finances so that we're not all being taken advantage of by the financial services industry because we're all in our own little silos. So my goals for today are to decrease your burnout, motivate you to learn more about personal finance and investing, and provide at least one change you can make this week that will improve your financial situation. I also hope to keep you awake and avoid wasting your time. My idea here is to present this in about 50 minutes. I know we started a little bit late, but we'll see what we can do about that, and then take questions. I will stick around after we do the public questions for as long as you like and answer your questions personally, sign books, whatever you want to do. I don't have anything going on until I've got a hockey game at 10:30 tonight, so I'll stick around as long as you want. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how financial planning decreases burnout. We're going to talk a little bit about student loan management. We're going to talk about financial advisors, paying for college, how much you need to retire. Then we're going to talk about your biggest tax break and some Utah-specific information about estate planning and asset protection. First, burnout. It is a bad idea to burn out when you're crossing a pothole in a slot canyon in Utah. You should definitely get to the end before your arms burn out. Burnout has been defined as an experience of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in situations that are emotionally demanding. It can also be an apparent daily trudge of a dull, monotonous, and tedious routine, or sheer exhaustion from years of struggling through demands and change. It's really got 3 components: physical and emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a lack of personal accomplishment. There's a lot of causes of it. A big one is a lack of control over your work environment and unclear job expectations. But dysfunctional workplace dynamics certainly play a part, as do differences between your personal values and the values of your workplace. You may find you have more burnout in a job that doesn't fit your interest and skills. And in fact, the job can either be too monotonous or too chaotic and cause burnout. It apparently has to be a mix of the two to minimize burnout. A lack of social support at work or away from work can also contribute the infamous work-life imbalance that we're always talking about. So who gets burnout more often? Well, I'm proud to say that emergency medicine is no longer at the top. We're third. So critical care gets the top spot, and who has burnout more often? But the trend is really not good here. If you look at 2011, that's the blue line, and the red line is 2014. Every specialty basically's burnout went up between those 2 years. Now, in the last couple of years, the surveys look like it might be leveling off, which I'm kind of excited about. But basically, we're seeing more and more burnout over the last 10 or 15 years. And it turns out if you don't just ask whether you have burnout or not, but actually rate how severe the burnout is, emergency medicine isn't too bad at all. We're pretty far down the list, actually, way down here. Critical care is still at the top, unfortunately. So apologies to all the intensivists, but that's what the data shows. Now, there's really 4 things I see that contribute to burnout. Okay? These 4 things are an abusive job, professional stresses, kind of inherent to the specialty or inherent to the profession for all of us, personal factors, what is often called lack of resiliency, and some of the financial issues that we'll talk about tonight. So, the abusive job, it might be too much volume, right? Got to see a bazillion patients. Might be not enough support, or malignant personalities working around you, or just unrealistic expectations. So what's the fix for that? Well, either fix the job or get a new one. That's the fix for an abusive job, right? Professional stresses, maintenance of certification, right? I mean, we've got a rebellion going on in internal medicine right now about maintenance of certification, and the other boards are taking note. And I'm seeing rapid changes in my specialty, and I hope you are as well. Electronic medical records are cited by lots of older docs as a reason why they're retiring early. Pre-approvals drive a lot of primary care docs nuts. The constant threat of malpractice we operate under. Just interacting with sick people is a stress that we're always going to have in medicine. The fixes for these are system-wide changes, sometimes for some people, career changes. A lack of resiliency might come from depression or pessimism or negativism or workaholism. Treatments for this are often listed as medical care sometimes. Therapy, dietary changes, exercise, yoga, meditation, or maybe working less call, fewer evenings, nights, weekends, and holidays, fewer shifts are the changes often needed here. And then, of course, financial issues. It might be the stress from student loans or other debt you may have, inadequate insurance, a lack of savings, or an overspending habit. And what's the solution to that? Well, financial planning is the solution to that cause of burnout. I think financial planning helps burnout in a lot of ways. It helps you get your financial ducks in a row, and it really helps with all 4 of those causes. It helps you make a job transition. It allows you to cut back. It allows you to basically eliminate your financial concerns. A financial plan basically helps you align your values with your time and money. That's what it does. It makes you financially independent earlier. And I can testify this to you. Medicine is way more fun when you don't have to do it. It's much more enjoyable to sit there as long as you want with the patient and do what you want with them because you don't care what your boss thinks. It's a very good feeling. And it helps you decrease your fixed expenses so you can live on less. It basically gives you what I call in polite company, walk away money. And allows you to consider many, many lifestyle improving options. When you have the money, you can afford to do those lifestyle changes. Okay, so let's survey the room for a minute, okay? If I handed you a $10 million check today, it's good, it's going to clear, it's tax-free, $10 million, you put it in your bank account today. How many of you would go to work tomorrow? Okay, that's pretty typical. Most hands in the room generally go up. Okay. Would you still be working a year from now? About the same number of hands, a few less maybe. Would you work the same number of days per week? Nobody. Well, we got one. We got one over here. Okay. And would you still take the same amount of call? Okay, I got one in the back. He's probably not taking call. But the point is this: unless you answered yes to all 4 questions, you need to admit to yourself internally that you are working, at least partially, for the money. And that's okay. Everybody else in America is working for the money too. But let's not kid ourselves that medicine is not also a job. Yes, it's a calling, it's also a job. Okay, so this is a net worth survey from 2016. Medscape basically just asked doctors, what is your net worth? Everything you own minus everything you owe. And I think there's a few interesting points here. Look at this here, okay? You see orthopedics at the top, no surprise, right? Pediatrics, family medicine on the bottom. That's the way it always is in these surveys. But I think it's interesting to note there a few things, mostly on the next slide. Okay, these numbers, the blue line at the top of each category is a net worth of under $500,000. Okay, so look at the docs in their 60s here. 11% and 12% have a net worth after presumably 20 or 30 or 35 years of physician-level paychecks of under $500,000. And a full quarter of doctors are not millionaires. That's everything. That's the house, that's the car, that's the bank account, that's the retirement funds, that's the investments. 1/4 of doctors are not millionaires in their 60s. That's a problem. And this is probably the reason why. If you ask them what their spending habits are, about 10% say I live within my means. About 60% say I live below my means. People would be surprised how much money I have. And a full quarter say I live above my means, spend a lot, and have credit card balances. These are doctors making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 living on credit cards. What expenses do we have? Well, a lot of us have mortgages, about 2/3 of us. 40% are making car payments. Another 20% have a lease. 2/3 of doctors are making payments on cars, basically. We've got a quarter to a third still making student loan payments. A fair number have a mortgage on a second home. Lots of debt there among doctors. I think we've become a little bit immune in medical school, and we just carry that on through the rest of our careers. Look here, emergency medicine's at the top. Woohoo! We got more loans than anybody. All right, let's talk about student loans. Student loan management is complicated when you're a resident these days. There's all these government programs you got to know about. But once you come out of residency, it gets really clear really fast. You're either going to get them forgiven or you're going to pay them back. So the people who ought to think about forgiveness are those who are directly employed by a 501c3. It's a nonprofit, government employer, university employer. You are their employee. You don't contract with them, you're their employee, and you're working full-time. You might want to think about forgiveness in that approach, especially if you made a whole bunch of tiny income-driven repayment payments during residency, because those all count toward the 120 monthly payments you have to make to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. With this program, if you make 120 on-time qualifying payments on a qualifying loan in a qualifying program, the rest of your debt is forgiven tax-free. There's lots of doctors counting on this. If you survey medical school graduates, you will see that approximately 45% of them are counting on this program to pay off their student loans. However, there's a problem with the program. It's run by the federal government, and the people running it are incompetent. I kid you not, they cannot count to 120. So if you're going to go into this program, you need to make sure that you can count to 120 and keep a record of every single payment you made that qualifies, and the form each year you fill out and have signed by your employer saying it's a qualified employer. So when you get to the end of the 10-year period, you've got an awfully good case in case you need to hire a lawyer to get the government to honor their deal. The deal's written in the promissory note. You just got to get them to honor it, because FedLoan and these other companies are not competent at keeping track of your payments. Oh, and the other thing is this program exists at the whims of Congress, right? It could go away at any time. Now, typically, a program like this, if you're already in it, you are grandfathered into it. But Congress can change the rules anytime they want. And both the Obama administration and the Trump administration have proposed change to this program, so it could change. So what do? Do you not go into it? No, I think it's still worth going for, just keep what I call a public service loan forgiveness side fund. And what that is instead of making these payments to Fed loans, you make the minimum payment there, and you make the rest of the payment to your investing account. And that way, if the program goes away, you take the money out of your investing account and you wipe out the student loans with it. Okay, if you're not working for a 501c3, then you might as well refinance your loans because private companies will give you a lower interest rate than the 6 to 8% the government gives you. And there's a bunch of them. There's 10 or 20 lenders out there doing it now. They'll give you terms of anywhere from 5 to 20 years. Please don't sign up for the 20-year plan. And the rates are as low as 2%. Most people end up with rates that are 3 or 4%, but that's still better than the 6 or 8% you had with the federal government. Of course, you have to qualify for this. If your credit score is terrible or your debt-to-income ratio is terrible, they're not going to refinance your loans. They expect to make a profit in their business. They won't give you a loan like the government just because you got into medical school. A couple other options. If you graduated with me in 2003 and the rest of my class, they refinance their loans at 0.9%. All right, if you got your loans at 0.9%, okay, fine, drag them out for a while and invest the money on the side. I'm okay with that. Another trick that some people do these days, if they've got a lot of home equity, is they actually refinance the home and use some of that money to pay off their student loans because they can get a lower interest rate on the house. But bear in mind, just moving the debt around doesn't get rid of it. To get rid of it, you got to make big payments each month. And the best way I know of to do that is encompassed in the most important 4 words of any talk I give to early career physicians or residents or medical students. Live like a resident. Live like a resident. That is the key to becoming a wealthy physician. It really is. My wife and I became millionaires 7 years out of residency because we did that. We earned like an attending, and we lived like a resident for the first 4 years out. It really does work. I'm not saying live like a resident forever either. I'm saying just do it for a few years after residency. But imagine this, right? If a typical resident salary is 50 grand, typical attending might make 300, depends on the specialty, obviously. If you use the difference between $300,000 and $50,000, even after tax, to build wealth, you can pay off your student loans very quickly. You can also save up a down payment on your dream house, catch up to your college roommates on retirement savings. It really does work very well. It looks like this. In fact, you don't even have to live like a resident. Give yourself a little raise, right? Give yourself a 20% raise. That would be huge in corporate America. Go from $50,000 a year to $60,000 a year. That's still, even if you're paying 80 grand in taxes, that leaves you $160,000 a year to build wealth. If you put $50,000 toward retirement, $90,000 toward student loans, and $20,000 toward a down payment, in 4 years, your $200,000 student loan's gone, you got $200,000 in retirement, and you have a nice down payment on a very nice house. It really does work. It really is that simple. It's basic math. Then at that point, you grow slowly into your attending income. If I can get that message to every graduating resident in the country, I will consider my life's work complete. All right, let's talk about financial advisors. In some ways, it's swimming with sharks, like this little trip to Belize I had. A good time if you ever get a chance to do it. They pull up to Shark Ray Alley and they throw out a bunch of chum and they say, jump on in there. And you look in there and there's 100 sharks. And you're like, how are they going to not mistake my fingers for chum? But they didn't. We survived. It was good fun. All right, here's what you need to know about financial advisors. They are not kindergarten teachers. Okay? They do not go into financial advising for the same reason that you went to medical school or you went to nursing school or people go into teaching. Okay? Remember that personal statement you wrote when you applied to school that talked about how you love science and just want to help people? Yeah, I wrote it too. But deep down inside, we all meant it. And that's why we get up at 3 o'clock in the morning when I call you from the ER and you come in and take care of a patient. Financial advisors do not write that statement. That's the most important thing you need to know about financial advisors. Okay? William Bernstein, who's a neurologist turned financial guru, said this about it. He said, you're engaged in a life and death struggle against the financial services industry. If you act on the assumption that every broker, insurance salesman, and financial advisor you encounter is a hardened criminal, you will do just fine. I'm not saying they're hardened criminals. Some of us have family members that work in the financial services industry. There are a few good guys out in the business. But this is the attitude you need when you interact with them. It's interesting. There's an article in JAMA from 1915 that talks about this, but we still haven't gotten the message. If you pay just 2% of your portfolio each year in investment expenses, that will have a very serious effect on your portfolio. Over 30 years, if you make 8% before the fees and you save 50 grand a year, the difference is 6 million versus 4 million. Is that advisor really worth 2 million bucks to you? Maybe not, huh? That's 5+ years of your gross salary, $80,000 a year in retirement income. Even if you adjust for inflation, it's still $1 million. So here's what I would look for if you're going to hire a financial advisor. You want someone that has a commitment to the profession. And how do they demonstrate that? Well, they go get a high-level designation. Okay? The high-level designations are CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst, CFP, CHFC, and if they are a CPA, a PFS. Now, that's all gobbledygook, right? They've all got 100 letters after their name, like some of the nurses on staff, right? They've always got these 25 letters after their name. But these are the ones that matter. This one requires 3 tests, takes about 750 total hours to study for them. The most common one, a CFP, takes about 200 hours of studying. Now, it sounds like a lot until you think about residency, and you're like, 200 hours, 80 hours a week, okay, that's 2.5 weeks, right? It's not the same thing as going to medical school and residency. Don't let them tell you it is. CHFC is basically a CFP for people coming from the insurance agent world. A PFS is basically a CFP for someone coming from the accounting world. Oh, go back. You also want someone more experienced than you. This is not the time to hire a 20-year-old. You want them to be a fee-only advisor, meaning they are not charging you commissions. You want them to have a fiduciary duty to you. That's basically like a Hippocratic oath, okay, that they'll do what's right for you no matter what's right for their pocketbook. You want them to have a knowledge of investing literature. There's actually journals, Journal of Financial Planning, the Journal of Investing. You want them to know what they say and to actually have some idea of the evidence behind investing. You also, it's nice if they have some experience with physician-specific issues, like some of the unique tax things that we encounter, some of the student loan issues we have, some of the retirement account issues, maybe some of the asset protection issues we have. It's nice if they have some expertise there. But there's basically 4 ways they charge you. The first is commissions, okay? The most common way is these loaded mutual funds. What is a load? It's a commission. So if you buy a mutual fund with a load, you give the advisor $1,000, he takes 50 bucks, puts it in his pocket, and puts $950 into the investment. The problem with this approach is the worst investments pay the highest commissions. So you end up with an advisor with this terrible conflict of interest to put you into crappy investments. Same problem with insurance products, particularly in products that mix insurance and investing. They can have very high commissions as well, such as whole life insurance. Commissions on that are anywhere from 50 to 110% of the first year's premium. So if you bought a policy that's $20,000 a year, that guy that sold it to you made 20 grand off selling it to you. That's why he pushed it so hard. The other 3 methods are considered fee only. The most common one is an asset under management fee, where you pay a percentage of your assets each year. This is a great deal when you have $1,000. This is a bad deal when you have $10 million. You see why? Because it's a percentage of your assets. So you got to do the math every year and make sure you're getting value out of what you are paying. That can range anywhere from 0.15 to 2%. An annual retainer is another way to pay somebody, perhaps $1,000 to $5,000 a year to manage your investments, or $500 to $2,000 to help you draw up a financial plan. Would not be uncommon rates. If you're paying by the hour, this is becoming more common each year. You typically pay $150 to $400 an hour. That's often more than you make an hour. What does that tell you? Well, that tells you one of the best uses of your time is learning how to do this yourself, right? Okay, all these have conflicts of interest, but the most important thing is to look at the bottom line and know how much you're paying each year for how much work. So the price you ought to be paying for financial advice is a 4-figure amount per year. If you're paying more than that, I can find you a financial advisor today that will give you at least as good advice for less money. All right, this comes from the Journal of Financial Planning. This shows the effect of fees over long-term periods. These are rolling 30-year periods on the x-axis. This is the percent share of market gains on the y-axis, meaning how much money your money made over those 30 years. Okay? Now, these are percentages. These are percentages of the money you made that go to the financial services industry. So if you're paying 2.5% per year in investment-related fees, approximately 60 to 70% of the money your money made went to the financial services industry. You took all the risk, you brought all the money, they got 60 to 70% of it. That doesn't seem fair, does it? At the industry standard, 1%, that number is about 30% of the money your money made. And even if you get down to a very inexpensive 0.5% per year, it's still 17 or 18% of the returns on your investments that went to the financial services industry. Fees matter. You have to pay attention to them. Small numbers like 1% add up to large numbers over time. Okay, let's talk about paying for college. These are my rugrats here. You can see the youngest one is having a great time. Doesn't she look like she's having fun there? This is a picture from Banff. There are really 4 pillars to paying for college. The first is perhaps the most important: school selection, also the student's contribution, the parental savings, and the parental cash flow. We'll go through each of these in turn. First, school selection. This is probably the most important. And we really don't do this very well in America because for some reason we're stupid about education, right? You'd think we'd be smart about education, but we're stupid about education. We don't think about the value at all. In fact, the typical 17-year-old needs significant parental input in choosing a college wisely. They are not thinking about value. They are not thinking about what they will make down the road from their degree or from the connections they make at that school. They are thinking about, oh, the buildings on campus are pretty. I like the trees there. My friend went to this school. Consider the value here, okay? Here's Worcester Polytechnic. It charges $47,000 per year. It is ranked number 60 here by U.S. News and World Report. Look at Clemson. It's ranked 66, more or less the same, and it charges in-state tuition of $14,000, about 1/3 as much for more or less the same education. Check out these two. Yeshiva University, right? It's number 66. It charges $41,000. And then we got Brigham Young here. The year I took this, it was $5,300. They're ranked basically the same, 1/8 the price. Now in Utah, we're very blessed with some very inexpensive state and private universities. That's not the case in much of the country. But choosing to go to school in this state can make a dramatic difference in how much you have to pay for college. There's a huge variation in tuition costs. There's huge variation in cost of living between Ephraim and Boston, right? Huge difference. In-state universities usually offer the best balance. Remember that most of our kids are probably going to be looking at graduate and professional school. So you're going to have a high expense down the road. Maybe don't go super high cost on the undergraduate education. In fact, I think you probably ought to avoid undergraduate debt completely. If you haven't worked through a FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, it can be an eye-opening experience as a physician. It basically helps you determine your expected family contribution. So they take the estimated cost of attendance that the school gives you, it's the tuition and the living costs, and then they subtract out your expected family contribution to find out the gap. And that's what need-based financial aid can fill. That's mostly loans, but it might be some grants or scholarships. The formula is somewhat complex, but if you actually sit down with the form and work through it, you will discover that income matters a lot more than assets, which is bad for doctors, and that the bottom line is that you should expect to contribute 1/4 to 1/3 of your income and approximately 6% of your assets. That is your expected family contribution. So if the cost of attendance is $50,000 and your income is $300,000, there's not going to be a gap there. They're not going to qualify for need-based aid. So that's the bad news. The good news is you don't have to dork around with financial aid planning, moving assets around where they can't see it. You're just not going to qualify. That's the bottom line. Possible exceptions is if you have a bunch of kids attending very expensive schools all at the same time, maybe you can qualify for a little bit of need-based aid. But for the most part, I would not count on any of this for the child of a physician. So what is the student contribution? Well, those are merit scholarships. In fact, their senior year, maybe that's their full-time job is applying for scholarships. Their own savings, their cash flow, right? How many of us work during undergraduate? Why can't our kids do that? They can, right? In the summers, they can have a part-time job during school. They can cash flow some of their cost of their education. They may end up having to take some debt out if they go to dental school or medical school, but the idea is to keep it to a reasonable amount that can be repaid very quickly. The parent has got savings, right? And also their cash flow. If you're still working while your kids are in college, that often happens in your early 50s, you can certainly take some of your current income and use that toward the costs. You don't have to save it all up front, right? If you do choose to save up front, this is probably the best place to do it, is a 529 savings account. In Utah, you get a 5% state tax credit for up to $4,000 per kid if you're married. So that's a pretty good little benefit there. You also get tax-protected growth and tax-free education withdrawals. As long as you spend on education, it comes out tax-free. You can put up to $15,000 per year, $30,000 if you're married, and you can front load up to 5 years worth of contributions. So you can put in tons of money all at once if you want. The kid gets born, you can pay for the whole thing right up front. Question back here.
Can you use that the same year you put it in?
Yes, you can take it out the same year you put it in. Once the kid's 18, you don't get the tax break though. So you got to put it in before they're 18. The Utah plan, luckily for you guys, I go all over the country and talk about this stuff, and I always tell them, if your plan stinks in your state, you're not getting a state tax break, go use the Utah plan because it's the best. It is. It's always in the top 5, no matter who rates it. It really is a good plan. It's got low cost, excellent investments from Vanguard and DFA, and they've got a pretty good state tax break, and they're always looking for ways to lower money. It's run very, very well. So be grateful we have the Utah 529 here. All right, let's talk a little bit about how much you need to retire. Retirement is not an age. It's not 65 or 67 or 70. It's a number, and that's the best way to think about it. And here's how you calculate the number. You take your spending, how much you spend, you subtract out any guaranteed income you have, and you multiply that by 25. That's your number. Now, where does that come from? That comes from a study called the Trinity Study, where some academics at Trinity University in Texas tried to answer the question of how much of your portfolio can you spend each year in retirement, adjusted upward for inflation each year, and not run out of money after a 30-year retirement. And it turns out the answer to that is about 4% of the portfolio. Even if the portfolio averages a higher rate of return, that's how much you can spend. And the reason why is what's called sequence of returns risk. That's when all the crummy returns show up at the beginning of the sequence. For example, if you get minus 5% returns the first 5 years of your portfolio and you're withdrawing money from it, that can really sink you, even if you have average returns of 6 or 8% over the 30-year period. So in order to account for sequence of returns risk, you have to lower that withdrawal amount to about 4% per year. Now, if you reverse engineer it, you can see why you now need 25x what you spend. If you can take out 4% a year, you need 25 times what you spend in order to be financially independent and retire. So basically, if you run the numbers, if you spend $120,000 a year, you're going to get 40 grand from Social Security. You multiply what's left by 25, that's a couple $1 million. That's what retirement is, a couple $1 million if that's what you spend. Bear in mind, the key here is to actually know what you're spending. If you're spending less, you need less. If you're spending more, you need more. You actually have to know. Here, that's the bad news of physician retirement, is you're going to need a lot of money to retire. So you better start saving and saving a lot. Here's the good news, okay? You don't have to replace your entire physician income. What I'm showing here is a typical working doc income and spending, and a typical retired doc income and spending. What I want to point out here is all these expenses that go away when you retire. Your tax bill goes down dramatically. You're not paying any more Social Security or Medicare taxes, and because of the progressive nature of our tax code, your income taxes, both federal and state, drop precipitously. You don't have a mortgage because you paid it off. The kids are through college. You don't have college savings. You no longer have work expenses. The kids are out of the house, right? They're not in the basement playing video games, right? They're out of the house. Your life insurance and disability insurance, you no longer have that need, so you cancel those policies, right? You still have health insurance and health care, and maybe you spend a little more on it. You probably give less to charity. Maybe you spend less on transportation, maybe more on travel. But the bottom line is you got to run these numbers for yourself, but most doctors will find when they run the numbers that they only need to replace 25 to 50% of their peak earnings. The more you save, the less you got to replace in the end. And so you don't have to replace your entire physician income in order to maintain the same standard of living in retirement. You can often get by with much, much less. Okay, if you find you're in trouble, if you're 58 and you're looking at these slides and you're like, oh crap, I'm not even close to where I want to be. Here's a couple of tips for you. One, cut spending now. A moderate cut now is much better than a drastic cut in a few years. And second, working longer is the solution to almost every problem when it comes to your finances. And the reason why is it allows you to do a few things. You get to put more money towards Social Security, which increases your Social Security payment. It increases your Social Security payment just because you can delay when you start taking it. It gives your investments more time for compound interest to work, and gives you more time to put more money into the savings accounts. So working even 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years longer can make a dramatic difference in how much money you have. You can also consider some alternative strategies. Downsizing, very popular. Moving. And the lower cost of living of the area you move to, the more of a difference it makes. You know, lots of people are going to Costa Rica and Guatemala. You go to someplace really inexpensive and you can retire on very little money. You can also purchase what's called a single premium immediate annuity. That is basically a pension. Pensions have kind of gone the way of the dodo bird, but you can still go buy them from an insurance company. You give them a lump sum of money and they guarantee you a payout every month for the rest of your life. And so that's one way you can spend a little bit more of your money. I think of it not so much as an investment as a way to spend your money in retirement. There won't be anything left for the grandkids if you put it all into a SPIA, but it is a way to maximize your spending in retirement. And remember that no physician is ever really more than 10 years away from retirement. And the reason why is if we just have a massively high savings rate, we can save enough money to have what middle class people retire on in less than a decade. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your biggest break. Here's another picture from the slot canyons of southern Utah where I'm trying not to break anything, but let's talk about tax breaks. Your biggest tax break is almost surely your retirement account. Let me talk to you a little bit about 401ks and why they're awesome, okay? They're awesome because you get an upfront tax break. It reduces how much you pay this year in taxes, right? Put $10,000 in there and your marginal tax rate is 42%. You just dropped your tax bill by $4,200. That's $4,200 more in your pocket that wouldn't be there if you hadn't put it in the 401k. You also get tax protection while it grows. What that basically does is it avoids the tax drag you see in a non-qualified or a taxable account. And so that makes your investments grow faster because you're not having to pay all those capital gains and dividend taxes as it goes along. And then in most states, you get an excellent asset protection from the 401k. And when you take it out, you get to take it out at a lower effective tax rate. And the reason why, you get to fill the brackets. This is a really important concept to understand. Even if your highest bracket is still quite high, you get to fill the brackets. If you have no other taxable income in retirement and you're married, your first $24,400 that comes out of that 401k comes out at 0% because of the standard deduction. So if you're saving 32 or 35 or 37% when you put the money in and you're taking it out at 0%, that's a heck of a deal. Another $19,000 comes out at 10%. Another $50,000 comes out at 12%. You see how this works? Another $75,000 comes out at 24%. So almost surely, even if you have some other income, Social Security or some rental property income or something else, you're still going to be taking it out at a lower effective tax rate than what you saved when you put the money in years ago. And that's why during your peak earnings years, tax-deferred retirement accounts are such a great deal. Okay, another retirement account that most docs ought to be using and all docs ought to know about is what's called the backdoor Roth IRA or the indirect Roth IRA. And what this comes from is a change in law in 2010. Before 2010, high earners were not allowed to contribute directly to a Roth IRA. They made too much. They were not allowed to deduct the traditional IRA contributions they'd make if they had a retirement plan at work, which most did. And they also were not allowed to convert their traditional IRAs to a Roth IRA. Remember, a Roth IRA is after-tax money. Everything comes out totally tax-free. A traditional IRA is tax-deferred money that you pay taxes on when you take it out. And so a Roth conversion is moving money from a tax-deferred account to a tax-free account and paying the taxes on it. You're basically kind of prepaying the taxes. You weren't allowed to do that before 2010. In 2010, Congress said, okay, you can do it now. Go for it, high earners. And what that allows us to do now is to wrong button, contribute to a traditional IRA, right? We could always do that. We just couldn't get a deduction for it. And then convert that to a Roth IRA. Now, there's no tax cost to doing it because you didn't get a deduction for putting it in the traditional IRA. It's totally a free conversion. You can do it the next day. Congress has given explicit instruction that this is okay to do. This is not against the law. The IRS has issued guidelines on it. You move it from the traditional IRA to the Roth IRA the very next day, it's fine. And in the end result, it's just like you'd contributed to a Roth IRA. You can also do it for your spouse. $6,000 a year if you're under 50, $7,000 a year for each of you if you're 50 plus. The only caveat is you can't screw up the tax paperwork. This is reported on tax form 8606, which has a line on it that says you basically can't have any money in a traditional IRA, a SEP IRA, or a simple IRA on December 31st of the year you did the conversion. So in order to get around that rule, you've got to either convert the whole thing or you roll your SEP IRA or your traditional IRA into a 401k because they don't ask about that on the tax form. So that's the one caveat. If that part just totally went over your head like it does for most audiences, if this is the first time you've heard it, just Google backdoor Roth IRA tutorial. It'll take you to my site. I'll take you hand by hand, walk you through the whole thing, walk you through the tax forms, show you how to do it on TurboTax, whatever you want, and you'll get it. Most people have to hear this about 3 times before it clicks and they realize why this is a good deal and is better than investing in a taxable account. Another great retirement account, in fact, my favorite retirement account, and the one I fund first every year, is my health savings account. And here's the reason why. It's triple tax free, right? With a Roth IRA, you put after-tax money in and it's never taxed again. With a 401k, you get a tax break up front and then you got to pay taxes when you take it out. With the health savings account, you get a tax break up front. It grows tax protected. When you pull it out, as long as it's used for health care, it comes out tax free. It's triple tax free. It's the best tax treatment of any account you have. And so that's why if a high deductible health plan is right for you and your family, then for heaven's sake, use the HSA. You can invest it in anything you like. You can do it at Vanguard or Fidelity or wherever you like and buy mutual funds just like you do with your 401k and let it ride for 20 or 30 or 40 years. There's a couple of other cool things about it. After age 65, you can take the money out and spend it on anything you like a sailboat. Okay? You just have to pay the taxes in that situation, no penalty. If you take it out before 65 and spend it on a sailboat, you got to pay a penalty and taxes, kind of like retirement accounts that way. But my point is, even if you got to pay taxes on the back end, that's just as good as your traditional IRA. It's just as good as your 401k. So at its worst, it's a stealth IRA. There's also one other cool provision of this law, and that is that you don't actually have to take the money out the same year you have the health care expense. You can just save the receipt. You have a child, save the receipt. You have an appendectomy, save the receipt. And then in 30 years, you can take that money out totally tax-free, totally penalty-free, and buy a sailboat with it. Okay? So a lot of people actually have a file where they've scanned the receipts and they know how much of their HSA is tax-free for any purpose they want. Other people just keep it simple and just spend the money on their tax expense or their health care expenses as they go along, and then just whatever's left over gets invested, which I think is perfectly reasonable if you don't want to keep track of 30 years of receipts. But that is one strategy some people are using. All right, let's talk about the basics of estate planning for a few minutes. This is my family, again, up in Banff. Okay, there's 3 reasons to do estate planning. 1 is to make sure your kids and your money go where you want when you die. 2 is to avoid probate. And 3 is to avoid estate and inheritance taxes. It's important not to confuse those 3 goals, because sometimes one estate planning step you take may not help with all 3 of them. So everybody needs a will. A will dictates where your stuff goes, but more importantly, it dictates who takes care of your money on behalf of your kids and who takes care of your kids. That's why if you have kids, you better have a will. And there's pretty much all of us need a will. It also dictates what happens to any of your money that isn't in a trust or isn't covered by beneficiary designations. So, probate stinks. You don't want to go through probate. If you have to go through it, you want to go through it with as few assets as possible. And the reason why is it's time-consuming, it's expensive, and it's public. So if you can avoid it, avoid it. Here's how you avoid it. Use beneficiaries, your retirement accounts, your life insurance policies, a lot of your investing in bank accounts can be designated to go directly to somebody when you die, such that all they need is your death certificate and they can get the assets. No courts, no lawyers, no judges. They can just go get the assets with the death certificate. So use beneficiary designations whenever possible. Anything that can't have a beneficiary designation, place into a living or a revocable trust. Now this has no asset protection benefit at all. It's revocable. You can take the stuff out and use it anytime you like. But the point is, anything that's in a revocable trust, when you die, doesn't go through probate. It's just dispensed according to what the trust says is supposed to happen. And so the idea is by the time you die, you have a revocable trust in addition to your will that takes care of all your stuff and none of it has to go through probate. That means you actually have to do more than just set it up with an attorney. You actually have to fund it, meaning you change the bank account names to the trust's name. You change the car's title to the trust's name, etc. Okay, here's why you probably don't care about the estate tax. In 2019, the federal exemption amount, the amount of money in your estate that is not subject to estate taxes, is $11.4 million. Double that if you're married. If you're not going to die with more than that, you shouldn't care about estate taxes. The death tax does not apply to you. And that is the case for the vast majority of doctors and other high-income professionals. Utah does not have a state estate or inheritance tax. This amount is adjusted upward each year for inflation by law. So unless Congress changes the law, which they obviously can at any time, this is going to be an even higher amount by the time you die. If you do happen to have a state tax problem, I would suggest that you give more money to charity. You can also give it to your heirs early using gifting rules. Remember, you're allowed to give $15,000 a year to anybody you like without using up any of this exemption. So if you and your spouse give away $15,000 a year to each of your kids, their spouses, your grandkids, and their spouses, you can liquidate a lot of money in a hurry and stay below those limits. You can also use an irrevocable trust. When you put money into an irrevocable trust, it's no longer yours and no longer counts toward your estate. And so if you stay within the gift tax limits when you put money into the irrevocable trust, that can also be a way to get money out of your estate. I hope you all have that problem. Okay, we talked about that. Let's talk a little bit about asset protection. Asset protection is this idea that is constantly on doctors' minds until they actually learn the statistics, and then they're like, why was I so worried about that? So let's talk about the statistics. I'm just going to use my specialty. It's about in the mid-range as far as malpractice risk and malpractice premiums go, and so it's a good representative starting point. Each year, approximately 8% of emergency docs are sued. 93% of those suits are dismissed or settled. Of those that go to court, the doc wins almost 80% of the time. So that leaves 1.47% of suits that the doctor loses in court. The average verdict of a suit in court is $800,000. The median is about half that. Utah's verdicts tend to be lower. Of the verdicts that award more than policy limits, the vast majority are reduced on appeal to policy limits. This famous one, $269 million award, policy limits. Yep, it's $269 million, what the jury says they're going to get. They appealed, and it was $1 million. And the policy paid the whole thing. It is exceedingly rare for a doctor to lose money to a patient. Very, very rare. We're all worried about it. We're worried about these lawsuits that go over our policy limits and they are going to take our personal assets, right? But if you actually run the numbers, I figure in emergency medicine, there's less than a 1 in 10,000 chance of being sued for more than your policy limits in any given year. So the next time you get a letter in the mail that says, you owe us $5 million for this unlawful death or this unlawful injury that you caused, keep this in mind. This is what the statistics show. In fact, there's such rare events that most of them make the news. And so we hear about them, we all get freaked out. Okay, so who's most likely to take your money? Well, it turns out it's your spouse. Because doctors are rarely sued for more than their malpractice limits. They lose far more wealth to divorce. So your marriage generally increases your net worth, but do it right the first time. Be very careful with the classic asset protection technique of putting everything in your spouse's name. That does not work out well in divorce. Asset protection law is state-specific. Utah's laws are actually, although our malpractice climate is pretty good, our asset protection laws are actually weaker than average. We do have a few protections, though. Retirement accounts are a big one. They're basically 100% protected in Utah, except amounts contributed within the last year. Cash value life insurance, i.e. whole life insurance, also protected in Utah. I don't really recommend it, but if you have a policy, that is one benefit of it. Except premiums paid in the last year. Annuities don't get any protection here. And our homestead law is particularly weak. If you're single, it's 20 grand if your home equity is protected. If you're married, it's 40. Compare that to Texas, where it's basically unlimited, plus you get 120 fowl, 12 head of cattle, and 2 firearms. You know? Why can't we have a cool law like that? Anyway, we do have one other thing that's cool, which is considered an asset protection trust. This is a type of irrevocable trust where you can be the beneficiary. It is an option in Utah if you're particularly concerned about asset protection and want to do something, want to pay a lawyer something to help reduce that risk. This is probably the thing to do in Utah. Be careful, however, with complex asset protection plans. There are firms out there who specialize in protecting your assets. Sometimes it's an overseas trust. Sometimes it's a convoluted system of LLCs and family limited partnerships. Bear in mind that you can spend thousands of dollars on all this stuff, but bear in mind the risk you are insuring against is that 1 in 10,000 per year chance of being sued above policy limits. So really think about how much time and effort and hassle you want to go into in putting together a convoluted system of overseas trusts and FLPs and LLCs. What should you do for sure? Buy malpractice insurance. Don't go bare. Okay, that is a risky strategy. A lot of people were doing that in Florida for a long time, particularly OBs, because their malpractice premiums just went through the roof in Dade County. But I highly recommend you buy insurance. Not only are you buying somebody to cover any payouts and settlements, but you're buying a legal team, right? When they got $1 million on the line, they send a pretty good lawyer. Also buy personal liability insurance. That is on your auto policy. That's on your homeowners or renters policy. If the state minimum is only $50,000 or $100,000, that is not enough. How long do you think it takes me to spend 50 grand in the ER on a trauma 1? Not that long, right? You order 4 or 5 CTs and all of a sudden put them in the ICU for a day and you're at $50,000 or $100,000 already. So that is not enough money, and that doesn't even include the value of the $60,000 Toyota Sequoia you just hit or the $80,000 Tesla you just hit. It's just not enough to have $50,000 or $100,000 in personal liability insurance. So jack those amounts up to $300,000 and then stack an umbrella policy on top of it. This is a personal liability policy. It's easy to buy a $1, $2, $5 million policy that sits on top of your homeowners and your auto insurance and covers those risks. About 80% of umbrella policy payouts are due to auto injuries. So if you got a teenage driver, this is a great thing to have. The good news is it's super cheap. It's even cheaper than term life insurance, right? I think my premiums for malpractice were $15,000 last year. My premium for twice as much insurance on my personal liability was $300. It's just super cheap. So call up the people that offer your auto and your homeowners and get an umbrella policy on top of it. Also, titling of your property can be important in some states. There is a thing called tenants by the entirety, which is really cool. Because what it says you own the entire asset, your house, your entire house, you own it, and your spouse owns the whole thing. So if just you get sued, they can't take the spouse because your spouse owns the whole thing. Isn't that a cool way to title property? Yeah, not available in Utah. Sorry about that. What is available, though, are retirement accounts. Every dollar you put in that retirement accounts, if you get sued, if you're that 1 in 10,000 that gets sued for $10 million and you have to declare bankruptcy, guess what you get to keep in Utah? The retirement accounts. You lose your brokerage account, you lose your bank account, you might lose the Tesla, you're probably going to lose most of the house, but you get to keep the retirement accounts. So max out those retirement accounts each year. Separate your toxic assets from your safe assets. What's a toxic asset? Something that can generate liability, like a rental property. If somebody slips at your rental property, breaks their neck, and decides to sue you because you didn't replace the light bulb fast enough, well, that's a toxic asset. So put those in an LLC. That way, if the worst happens and you have some huge suit, all you lose is that investment property because you don't own it. The LLC owns it. Remember that incorporating doesn't protect you from malpractice. A lot of doctors have this crazy idea that if they just incorporate, they can't be sued. That does not work. Malpractice is always personal. It does protect you from other business creditors and lawsuits. Essentially, you can declare bankruptcy on the business. Asset protection plans don't have to be expensive. You really don't need one until you have assets that aren't protected in other ways. And it also helps if you don't tell people you're a doctor. For some reason, that seems to make some people feel greedy because they assume you're rich, even though, as we saw in the beginning, many, many doctors are not rich, particularly early in their career. So here's what we learned today. We learned that financial planning is probably the best burnout prevention and treatment because it gives you so many options that can prevent and treat burnout. If you're not in public service loan forgiveness, refinance your loans. Okay? There's no reason to be paying 8% when you could be paying 3%. Get good advice at a fair price. Remember the 4 pillars of paying for college, particularly value. Remember, you need 25 times your expenses to retire. An HSA and a backdoor Roth are great retirement accounts. Estate planning avoids probate, minimizes your taxes, and ensures your legacy. And your spouse is your greatest asset protection risk. Thank you so much for your attention. So I thought maybe we'd take questions for perhaps 5 minutes as a group, and then I'll hang around afterward and answer any other questions that people have. Trust me, if you have it, somebody else in here has it too. Back here. What if you do not like your employer's retirement plan? Well, you have a few other options. One is quit and go to an employer whose plan you like. 2 is moonlight, so you have a separate business and open a retirement plan for that business. You can have 2 401ks, one for your moonlighting and the one at your employer. That's an option. You can also, if you like the job otherwise, you can always invest in a taxable or non-qualified account. There are some benefits to doing that. You can tax loss harvest each year, which helps reduce your tax bill. You get a lower rate on your dividends and your capital gains than you would otherwise, as long as they're long-term capital gains and qualified dividends. You can also donate appreciated shares to charity. There are some benefits of investing in a taxable account. In general, it's inferior to a 401k or a Roth IRA, but it sure beats not saving at all. So I think that's probably the answer you're looking for, what to do if your employer plan stinks. Another option, of course, is to remind your employer that they have a fiduciary duty to you. They can be sued by their own employees if they offer a crappy retirement plan. And so I'm not saying you should sue your employer. I'm saying you might want to drop a note that points that out on their desk sometime and see if it gets them excited. Because the truth of the matter is their retirement money is probably in there too. And they're probably getting hosed by high fees and crummy investments. And it's hurting them at least as much as it's hurting you. And so a lot of times this is a real win-win. Just be very careful trying to change your employer's retirement plan because it might have been set up by his golf buddy. Right here. Sure. The question is, would I address the radio ads that we're hearing these days, depending on the stations you listen to, that basically promise you 10% returns on your investments and claim you won't lose anything in the market and that you can protect things from your creditors, et cetera. You know, they make all these outlandish claims. And they're exactly that. If you really become financially sophisticated and you listen to what they're saying, you know what they're advertising. They're advertising annuities. And most annuities are products designed to be sold, not bought, right? They have high commissions, so the guys push them. Now, most of them really believe in their product. They think it's great, but the truth is it's not right for very many people at all. And if they are going to buy an annuity, it's not the high commission ones you should be buying. And so what is the key to it? Well, the devil's in the details, right? What are you giving up to get 10%? Well, usually that 10% includes some return of your principal. It's not just all interest. It's not just return. So you give that up. What else do you give up with an annuity? Well, you don't get the money at the end, right? That doesn't left behind to your heirs. If you're living off a 401k and there's money left over at the end, it goes to your heirs. Not the case with most types of annuities. And so the devil's in the details. You have to actually dive into the details to find out why they're able to offer those things. Does that make sense? So each one of them is individual, and without putting it in front of us and dissecting it and going through it line by line to really find all the catches. It's hard to generalize, but all of them have some catches. There is no free 10% return out there available. Except your credit cards. Pay off your credit cards.
The timing on doing Social Security withdrawals, the timing on doing when you start taking Social Security, you've heard a lot about that on those same channels.
Okay, so let's talk about Social Security. When do you take Social Security? Well, if you are single and healthy, you should take it at 70. If you can at all afford to do so, you should take it at 70. And the reason why is it provides the best annuity you can buy. You cannot buy an annuity that pays as well as delaying Social Security does. So unless you've got some terrible diagnosis that you're not expected to live to your expected retirement or to your expected life expectancy, you should delay it to 70. Now, when you start adding a spouse in there, things get complicated. And the best book I know of that discusses these situations is by Mike Piper. It's called Social Security Made Simple. It's a book about this big, and it's only 100 pages long. You don't even have to read every chapter. You just read the chapters that apply to you. That is the best thing if you're really curious about that. But one strategy that's often used is for the higher earner to delay till 70 and the lower earner to take theirs at regular retirement age and then take half of the higher earners' Social Security when they reach age 70. That's a common one that's used. But there's all kinds of other ones. If you're divorced and you're claiming your ex-spouse's Social Security, there's other techniques. And so if you're in any kind of a complicated situation like that, it's worth learning about, whether you have to pay somebody to do it or read a book to do it. Next question, right here.
Can you talk a little bit about tax-deferred savings accounts, like personal savings accounts?
Sure, tax-deferred savings accounts include things like 401ks, 403bs, 457bs, cash balance plans, IRAs.
I mean like a personal savings account that you
Okay, the only savings account, the only personal savings account that qualifies for that tax deferment is one of those accounts. You can open an IRA at a bank and put a savings account inside of it, so the investment is a savings account, but the account is an IRA. But if you just go to a bank and open a savings account, there's no tax deferral there. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? I feel like there's something in there we're not connecting on, but we can connect afterward maybe. Question in the back. There is no income cap on a conversion. Prior to 2010 there was, but right now there's no income cap on moving money from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. You do have to pay the taxes on it, regardless of when the money was put in. No income cap now. Now there is an income cap on contributing directly to a Roth IRA. That's $193,000 this year for married couples. I think it's $120 or so for singles. But well, because they may not want to pay the taxes now. If they're in their peak earnings years, it's tax-free for what you contributed this year. If you put $6,000 in there, didn't get a deduction for it, and then converted it, that $6,000 is converted tax-free. But a bunch of money you put in an IRA years ago that was all tax-deferred money, that doesn't go across tax-free. You got to pay taxes on that. Because you make too much money and the government hates you. Oh, I think it's 60,000, 70,000. That's probably